There it is, recording in progress. All right, looks like things are set now. I was saying I'm going to be honest right now. Well, hopefully ministers are always honest, but I'm going to be honest right now about something that ministers also struggle with, and I've struggled with. I've had a lot of trouble lately, as have many people, accessing hope. I'll be honest about that. Finding hope that the country's heading toward a moral grounding in love, that we're moving in the direction of truly confronting the real problems we face. This has, to be frank, been quite difficult. I'm sure you can empathize. In fact, until this week, I had refrained for quite a while from shouting into the social media void. But after the Rittenhouse trial disaster, I let loose and I wrote a few sentences with quite a few exclamation points. Now I'll forgive myself. If done sparingly and sensibly, this type of reaction too can be therapeutic. But having reacted in that way, having done that, I realize even more the importance of the action I take outside of that, the social work, social justice work that leads to real change. I'm much more aware of that, and therefore I'm much more aware of the absolute need to have hope. So, as I said, we find ourselves facing numerous existential crises, a political system broken, seemingly beyond repair, an environment that's been neglected and abused to within an inch of its life, the normalization of racist and fascist rhetoric and activity, the implementation of discriminatory policy, and more. Many Americans, and certainly many liberals like myself, are processing a loss. We're processing losing aspects of a culture that we thought existed, but we're now not so sure. And we're processing confronting other cultural realities of our society, of our country, that we wished didn't exist, but we must admit that they do. I know this is harsh, but it doesn't do anyone any good to sugarcoat the truth, in my opinion. Today, says the theologian Walter Brueggemann, the task of progressive religionists like me, like ourselves, like this congregation, the task of progressive religionists is to be, quote, practitioners of hope in a culture of despair within communities of faith and action, because no one can fully hope alone. So as a minister in a progressive faith, leading a beloved community, my job description is literally to provide this hope for our communities during times of distress. It is incumbent upon me to excavate hope from the recesses of our hearts, even and especially in the most desperate of times. And as Reverend John Burens wrote, to take refuge, not from reality, but refuge here within a house, a community of hope. As the reading said, the hope we need, active hope, is more than mere optimism, optimism which often involves just turning away from reality. We require a radical active hope that truly turns toward reality, allowing us to continue, often like now, without even being able to imagine how we're going to continue. The word radical signifies transformation. Radical active hope is not, therefore, the hope that things will gradually get better. And I believe they will. But radical active hope is the hope that things will and must change altogether. According to an academic paper I read recently entitled Radical Hope in Revolting Times, radical hope, quote, differs from more traditional and Western psychological applications of hope in its focus on a commitment and courage to achieve a vision involving new forms of collective flourishing. We commit and we use courage to develop new forms of collective flourishing. And although our present may be, as the article said, revolting in many ways, the future is actually, I would use the word revelatory. It's constantly revealing itself. We don't know what's going to come next, and this alone can give us some hope. All right, so, Mr. Minister Joshua, How do you plan to do this? How do you plan to find hope, to find this new collective flourishing, especially when there's so many reasons to be concerned about our future? And you yourself said you had trouble accessing hope. Well, according to Professor Jonathan Lear in his book, Radical Hope, Ethics in the Face of Cultural Devastation, recognizing and admitting our losses. Like I mentioned before, the liberals have lost a number of pieces of our culture. Recognizing and admitting these losses enables a rebirth of sort. We mourn these losses, even of the things I've heretofore not even wanted to accept or confront. Mourning these things that we don't want to accept are true clears the ground. Accepting these things, grieving for these things, accepting that they are there, clears the ground to reveal, in Lear's words, the radical spark of hope. The first step of grieving, the first step is grieving, is mourning of losses. That's the first step in being able to have radical hope. Accept our losses, mourning, grieving. And beyond that, radical hope can be activated in numerous ways. Talked about our ancestors through Hanukkah, through Christmas. We learn about bravery and courage and light and hope of our ancestors, and they've shown us how to move forward if we just look. Our collective memory is ripe with pathways through all manner of tragedy. All manner of tragedy we have overcome. Embracing ancestral pride is also proven, actually scientifically, to produce positive psychological results. There has been over time in our lives and before our lives in our world, there has been collective flourishing. Realizing this immense struggle over hundreds of years, leading up, for instance, to the election of our first female person of color as vice president. Realizing what struggle that took to get here, and we're actually here. It's not perfect, but we've overcome that struggle, and we have elected a person of color as vice president, a female person of color. This realization activates hope that transformative change can happen. Understanding the struggle over oppression and resistance, this is one way that opens up the pathway to radical hope. And we understand this through the lens of ancestral pride. If we focus on commitment to having faith, taking agency ourselves, we can use these stories of our ancestors that teach us pride, that teach us resilience, that teach us courage, that teach and how to radically heal. We can use them to create new possibilities, to create meaning and purpose as a roadmap through struggle into a radical hope for victory, as they did. The world has seen commitment and courage. Specifically, I'll tell you, we've healed from genocide. We've healed from war. We've healed from severe collective trauma in many ways. And that commitment has led to tons of these radical healings. And you can't have radical healing without radical hope. So therefore, radical hope must be possible. The Pulitzer Prize-winning Dominican-American author Junot Diaz wrote, quote, "When I look at what my community has taught this world about justice and about humanity in the face of abysmal inhumanities, well, I've got to tell you, that alters the calculus of hope, and it gives me hope." So creating meaning and purpose allows for radical hope. Humankind, against all odds, does have the capacity to find meaning and purpose. The life work of Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor, his life work was grounded on the capacity for imprisoned Jewish people in concentration camps to somehow find meaning and hope. And this too was hope beyond mere optimism. There was no reason to be optimistic. It was hope containing virtues of courage, as outlined by Aristotle. These virtues are a proper orientation toward what is shameful and what is fearful. You have to understand and accept that. It's a real grasp of the situation one is in, not letting go of reality. It is a courage that is directed toward what is good, with the full understanding of the risks and the certain pain, because it will be painful, and understanding of those risks and pain involved. Something else that facilitates hope is what we're doing today, being in covenantal community together. I'll go back to the Hebrew Bible. It uses multiple terms for hope, and one is tikvah. I don't know if you've, hatikvah, the hope, is the national song of Israel. In the book of Joshua, coincidentally, tikvah is not first defined as hope. It's defined as a rope or a cord, something that's wound tightly together and thus is strong. And we can then infer that later instances in the Bible where tikva is defined specifically as hope, that they incorporate this first meaning of being bound together in strength. In other words, rather than individualistic hope, biblical hope is hope within and for a strong community. Envisioning possibilities as well, another pathway to radical hope. And not just what we would consider reasonable personal goals, but radical possibilities. And that envisioning enables radical hope. Knowing that ancestors have achieved far-reaching socio-political change in this country and the world opens space for imagining other radical possibilities for what appears to be unlikely change. We can also put our minds, our hearts and our minds in the space of radical hope by envisioning possibilities within beloved community through ritual, as our Unitarian Universalist worship services do. Today is also, as Carolyn mentioned, the first Sunday of Advent, which represents hope to Christians. It's also the first night of Hanukkah, and that Hanukkah holiday celebrates courage and hope. Both of these holidays use light in a ritual manner to represent hope and courage. And by lighting the candles on these holidays and lighting our chalice, we connect through tradition with this hope for a brighter future. And finally, in practical terms, we can activate hope by doing a few things, by truly listening rather than fighting, by using wisdom instead of impulsive reactivity and impulsive action, by calling upon the courage and virtues tied to our collective traditions, and by having compassion, empathy, and a willingness to seek understanding. You'll find many of our UU principles in there. And only by living our principles can we clear the way and actively hope to catalyze necessary transformative change. Is it easy? No. Will it take time? Yes. Is it possible? Absolutely. So we come here today to commune in joy and we sing our hymns. But we do not do so by ignoring the world about us. We also grieve and we mourn and we recognize our reality, however stark that may be. And in spite of that, we take care of our spirits, purposefully and intentionally continuing to worship together and generate radical hope for radical healing. And as the author Lear, who I quoted earlier, put it very poetically, quote, "It is one thing to dance as though nothing has happened, to ignore reality. It is another to acknowledge that something singularly awful has happened, the collapse of happenings. Acknowledge that, and then decide to dance." So to conclude, I would like to play another video for our closing music that this has and continues to inspire me. And those of you who have seen me preach before, probably last year around Thanksgiving time, will have seen this video because I use it to lift up our indigenous kindred on whose land we sit. And in California, it's the land of the Tongva and the Quiche and the Chumash and the Tatavayam indigenous nations. So I listen to this song all the time. It lifts my spirits. If you've heard it before, I'm sure you'll be glad to hear it again. It exemplifies a connection by the indigenous people to the collective memory of indigenous sibling ancestors, by their embracing of ancestral pride, as I talked about, that brings hope. It models a community that has been oppressed almost beyond comprehension and still having faith and claiming agency in changing the world, still using radical hope. This video declares loudly that even though we're proud members of different groups in a pluralistic society, meaning is made through a spiritual connection in community to all humanity.